Welcome to Software Testing Unleashed, the podcast for testers, developers, and test automation engineers, and all the people in the software development process who want to create great, amazing quality software. My today's episode was recorded at Testwars, a great testing conference in Poland. The days were full packed with great quality content, and I had a great time discussing and chatting with the Polish and the international software test community. If you haven't been here, you should definitely go to one of the next Testwars conferences. You find a link to the conference in the show notes. My guest today is Bartosz Czernic-Goławski. He is a penetration testing and cybersecurity audit expert, and we talked about mobile security, especially the evolution of mobile security through the eyes of a pen tester. What changed in the last 20 years when we think of security in the mobile area? Enjoy the episode. Hi Bartek, great to have you on the show here.
Hello Richie, thanks for invitation.
Yeah.
I'm really honored about like this is my the first time in such thing like podcast or like even recording like the interview or how we called it.
Yeah, great. So it has to sometimes someday you have to be the first time in an interview, and now it's starting
especially in English, and that was my like the biggest like issue when I was thinking about like should I say yes or no? Like when Grzegorz texts to me if I want to join your podcast. So
we don't have to think about that because the people are also hearing my English, and so they're still joining the podcast.
Yeah, actually, I was at the lecture in the morning today about speaking English, and they gave me like the kick in my butt, to not be shy, and even when everyone makes mistakes, and especially in like the podcast and everything, it's like people like didn't pay attention to things like that.
Yeah. And now you're here, so you're motivated to speak English. Yeah. And I read your abstract up front to the conference here for the Testwars conference, and it was reminded me on my first mobile phone because you wrote about the Nokia, I think 33212 one of the
3310 we say in Polish I
can't remember the former times how we spelled it correctly.
Just an example of the iconic unbreakable
where the battery still works today.
Actually this is one of the first slides on my presentation is something about that the phones back then in the past, like the only thing that your phone should do is stand on battery 7 days and serve as a thing that you can for example replace the bricks.
That's true. So we are directly into the topic because your topic is about security of the evolution of security importance from the old phones to the phones we have now.
Actually, not only phones, because it's like the topic, but all the mobility, like the whole whole topic, because the mobile security is not only about phones but also about the networks, mobile networks. So in my presentation I will talk something about that, also about evolution of the from analogic, like the analog networks, like advanced mobile system in America, United States, to 3G, 4G, 5G, everything, and also something about users, because it's not only about mobile apps and mobile phones. I think it's especially about people and
and we merged a lot of other gadgets into our phones, so over time. So in former times it just was a phone. And now it's a completely ecosystem of different things. Yeah,
yeah, that's true. Now it's actually a computer. So, but my colleague always said that the problem and the biggest problem with the old IT stuff is the sitting between the monitor and the keyboard. Somewhere
okay,
there.
I can imagine that. Yeah. When we see at the security point of view, do you have what do you see in this evolution from former times to now? What gets more important, or where should we focus? And
when I was doing like this presentation, it shows me actually that this we have to take this walk from these old phones, from these phones that you could only use for the phone calls and everything to this stuff, because the people back then makes those mistakes, and they are actually they did that because, and now we can learn from this, from the mistakes they made, and we can this whole path we just maybe I was lost a little bit my thread. But what was the question?
What evolved in security concerns from the former times to now? So you said we can learn from that. So what can we learn there?
Maybe to because there is I think 3 categories or something in the when we talk about this security. So to focus on on every category. So for example, the mobile networks, so back then there was analog the system, and you could eavesdrop the whole communication, and the only thing you need was the device was near to this phone, and you can listen every conversation and everything, because there was no the cryptography, the calls was not encrypted, and all the stuff. Today we have this topic is we have in 5G and LTE and everything. We have the ciphers and everything. When we talk about people, for example, back in the 80s, 90s, there was a group of people they were called phone freaks. So they was using the special tone to to call the telephone exchange, back in then there was machines like that, and they were using special frequencies to tell this telephone exchange, for example, to they forced it to make free calls, for example, because they were able to tell to this exchange system to they were talking to it that okay, now my conversation is over, just wait for another commands, and it was all the system AT&T, for example, was thinking that the call is ending and now the line is free, but the line wasn't free, and they were using it to, for example, call from US to Europe,
which was very expensive in former times.
Mobile apps, back in the days, for example, we were starting from the, for example, very first iPhone or something. In mobile apps there was also a lot of vulnerabilities and everything that we had to learn how to build up in the secure way. For example, in the Android system, you can force some app to tell you some information from your attacker app. So you have an app and you can like tell some other app to send some sensitive information. So we have to learn how to secure those information. What we can do or what we can't do. Like we can't just expose. For example, we can't put sensitive information in push notification. And actually, this is something fresh that we learn, because push notification is also like the new thing in smartphones. So, for example, I think that till 2021, 2022 or something, we like then like the light of the day was like put on this topic, on this issue, that the governments, for example US governments, was asking Android or iPhone to send them some information about push notifications, like the metadata. So that's something that everyone was thinking, that there is no sensitive information there, but actually they were like, so we're still learning, and we are from the very first phone we are start learning, and we're still learning, and we were making mistakes, like listen, learn, try to fix this, and another thing.
What do you think is today's when we see the today ecosystem with iPhone, Android, and all this stuff? What are typically problems we have still in security issues with these systems? Maybe by design, because we use them as they are.
In Android, for example, because when we take definition of Android is more like open. iOS is more like closed, walled garden system or something like that. But actually, that's not true today. Like, it's for another conversation. But for example, in Android is much easier to put, for example, a malicious app into the Play Store, because the ecosystem is more like open, and it's easier to force user to install this malware application, because in Android you can just take APK, like the file of the application, and install it on Android. In iOS it's harder. So I think in Android is a malware application that sometimes shows up in Play Store, or forcing users to install those applications. In iOS, I think there is abusing of the accessibility services is really the topic today, and all the excessive the permissions, the apps demands more that they need to work. So this is some kind of things that today's application do. I can speak more
it's very interesting. I think because we are
insurance company, for example. They have plans to give you the special price for your insurance of your car when you are a good driver. What the good driver is, and how they know that you are a good driver. So your phone has a lot of the sensors, like the GPS, microphone, the accelerator, or everything. So and this all stuff is actually now not treated like some sensitive. So this is another the issue, and I think that there's something that should be changed, because they want to monitor your sensors, and they will know if you very often use your brakes, for example, in an unsecure way, or if you are speeding or something. So they are trying to monitor us, and this is also like the stuff that today is a topic, is an issue. And I think that all the line, like where is the line between the usability and abusing? Where does it end? Like, because when you were back in the 2010, when you were buying first iPhone or something, you were buying a phone. Like and you were thinking that you just want to call to your family or something, and you were not like accepting all the monitoring stuff, all the things, all the data that they're trying to collect every second, and try to do something with this collected data. It's sometimes it scares me. But that this is the world we have, so we have to try like to deal with it and do best we can to I don't know, to know like there is a practice like that, and try to fight with it. I don't know, even like to be aware of it. I think
I think awareness is a very, very important thing in this direction, that we know that there are permissions in the apps, and they are collecting data, and some points of that we can also decide to give the app the permission or not. So
because like some permissions, and also this is like connected to all the stuff we talk about it earlier, that about the users and about all the social engineering and the psychology of creating apps, because not only they are demanding, for example, some permissions that they don't need to have to properly, for example, to app to work properly, but when they are demanding this permissions, like the users are lazy, So, for example, I need to do, I need the lighter, So I will accept everything that they said, and even not write it because it's long and everything,
I think convenience is a big issue there. I think we see it when we use our messaging systems. So everyone uses WhatsApp. We know it's better to use Signal or Telegram or something like that, but we use WhatsApp because everyone is using it, and we don't.
Yeah, that's true. And attackers, like the people that creating malware apps and everything, they know what apps we are working with, we are using, and they take advantage of it. For example, there's something attack that is called overlay attacks, and this is the malicious app have access to this working in Android, especially because for example, in a Messenger app and in WhatsApp app, you have those chat pop-ups like in I don't know, you are using iPhone, so maybe you don't remember. iPhone, but you have a small this chat, like the things that you can click, and the whole conversation will that there is some notification, someone texts to you, and you can just click it, and you're using another app, and this is always there, always. So there is something called the permission to work on the another app, so they can have a layer on the app that is on the top of the screen. And what's the problem here? For example, you have a Facebook, and Facebook app have this login, like the email and password, this boxes always in the same always in the same place, and they know what the place is, so they create the app that put the layer, you think that you are providing the email and the password into the Facebook, and actually you are putting this credentials to the boxes that are just placed in the same place as the correct login.
Okay, yeah.
So
And then my credentials are gone.
Yeah. And this is not only Facebook, but the banking app and everything. Yeah.
Now, you did mention before iOS, and I'm using iOS because then I feel totally secure. Am I secure?
I think, I think that we are really secure when we know what the techniques attackers like using and everything. So just when we using, maybe we don't know. The only thing that we don't know is what is like what they are doing with the data. Like we are providing this all the applications. For example, maybe when you are using Instagram, so maybe your data is used to teach some AI that the Meta is creating. So this is the kind, I think, the issue that is related to security but when you are aware like of the I don't know, you don't have jailbreak in your iOS or something, you don't like download the malicious potentially malicious app, so you don't install it from the sources that is unknown. So you are pretty secure. Maybe not that secure if you are a president or something, because now then like all the new spectrum of the attacks like just open of the spyware, all the spyware like the Pegasus or everything is like the new thing that you have to think of. When you are this, for example, me that is working in some company in Poland, I'm not very like the known people, and maybe I'm not so interesting person from the perspective of the I don't know, Russian government or something. So I think on iOS, but you live in Europe, so now the European Union like they released something called Digital Market Act or something, and now you can install the apps on the iOS, not only from app stores. They like allowed allowed users of iPhone to use another like market
another places. App store like Alt Store or something.
Like alternative, because they say that this is something related to monopolies and like forced Apple to like allow because and this is like fighting with the monopolism of the iOS, but from the perspective of the safety of the users, I don't know, is it a good practice? Maybe yes, because maybe those different like the stores also will be the apps that will be placed there will be verified and everything. But the history shows that the in Play Store it's harder to keep in a secure way than in iOS when it's all the like the security is from the people that from the Apple company or something.
When I now think about that and to say, okay, I don't want to go into Android and iPhone, are there still phones which work nowadays which are not in this smartphone area? I don't know it. Do you know something?
I think yes, because the 2G GSM is still working. So when you have like phone like that, so you can still use it. So and I heard something actually when I was on my last trip in mountains near the Wisła here. I like meet some people on the path. And the guy said to me that he thinks more and more about dropping smartphone and like buy some really straight like phone that can only be used for the calls and everything. So I think there is like, if you want to use just phone, you can use it. Like
maybe. But I don't know if it's really, again, the part of convenience, and then not chatting, not WhatsApping, not playing around with the stuff. It's hard.
Yeah, you can, but even if you do this, there are still some vectors of attacks that are you can be the victim of, like all the eavesdroppings, like the trying to listen to your conversation or your text messages, because this all, I think that it should be like old phone, because I don't know any like the new created phone that is not the smartphone, but I don't know if there is device like that. I maybe there is, but I didn't heard of it. So when you are using old phone, you are like forced to use the old technology. So for example, 4G and 5G, like the mobile network will not work on it. So you have to use for example, GSM with all the design mistakes that it has.
Maybe I have one Nokia, one old one in my desk, so maybe I will grab it out and try it if it will work.
Actually, because it's also related to country. Like I know that in Poland, for example, the GSM is still working, but I don't know actually the area, like where. I don't know what is what this situation looks like in other countries. So.
And someday they will shut down the old networks, I think so.
Yeah, but this is like also kind of issue, because you have old people, for example. So this is the also issue that you create, for example, new mobile app, but if this app, for example, comes from Polish government, they cannot forget about old people, for example. So they are forced to support all the, for example, older Android versions and everything. So and all the older technology. So for example, we have 5G with better cryptography, for example, exchanging information between telecommunication operators in more secure way. For example, all the SIM cards are better secured there, but you have also people that are not using, for example, not changing their phone every year, but they have their phone that they were buying 10 years ago or something, and this still works, and so he's still using it.
Great. I think that the real important thing is, as you said, to be aware of that there are issues, and to be aware of what you have in your pocket there. It's a little computer with a lot of functionality which can be used or misused.
And also because for the citizen, like for example me and you, I think the most like the most danger, the biggest issue is all the social engineering campaigns. So all the smishing, phishing things, like they try to get your for example payment data or everything, payment card data, number and everything. So or force you to install those malicious apps, because it's also related to this market. There is all the another big problem is with the cloning of the official apps and creating with some change in it to work differently. But not it's not always about some malicious like the actions that is placed in this app. It's also, for example, to maybe like the to get advantage of the company. For example, take the Uber app, like the taxi or apps. So there are attackers that are I don't know if attackers, there are people that creating those app for drivers that it allows drivers to change their location, for example, because for example when the driver is far away from city center, he could not take those drive. Like when you are you want to grab a taxi, so you are like opening the app, and the app tells you that some Andrzej will be here in 5 minutes, and you accept him as a driver, and when you accept it, it's like now he is like 15 minutes from there.
Okay.
So they are using it because it's money from them. Like he don't want to wait for it, and also there is some places in a city, for example, that is much better paid or something, like when you are grabbing a passenger from the city center is economically better than from the suburbs or something.
Yeah, that explains some issues that I had with Uber in the past.
Yeah.
Great, Bartek, thank you very much for these insights into security. I hope we get some more awareness at the audience for this stuff to take care on their smartphones and to keep it safe and secure. Thank you much that you joined here, and I wish you good luck for tomorrow for your speech.
Thank you very much.
And a very nice conference.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
And also, bye-bye.